Pursuant to Governor's emergency proclamation related to the COVID emergency, Hawaii Revised Statutes, Chapter 92, regarding public agency meetings and records is currently suspended in part through October 6th, to the extent necessary to enable boards to conduct business without holding meetings open to the public and to allow state agencies the ability to effectively and efficiently provide emergency relief and engage in emergency management functions. At this time, we are able to live stream the open portions of this meeting via the DHHL website. Commissioners, I would just remind you that you had been sent a quick cheat sheet on Act 220, which was passed by the legislature this year. And it has to do with remote meeting by interactive conference technology. Just a little reminder, for open meetings, you have to say who's in the room with you, if anyone is in the room with you. And this is for commissioners. You must keep your camera on unless you're excusing yourself from the meeting. A quorum of commissioners must be visible during the meeting. Okay, so you must keep your camera on. We must keep track of the quorum of commissioners being visible during the meeting. In executive sessions, no one can be in the room with you or be able to hear the conversation. You will need to confirm this to the chairman. You don't need to be visible, so you can turn off your camera if you want. That's during executive session. So one quick change due to changes in the emergency proclamation by the governor. Leah, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Awol. Commissioner Helm.
Here.
Commissioner Ka'apu.
Aye.
Commissioner Kalekini.
Aye.
Commissioner Ka'upu.
Here.
Commissioner Namu'o.
Aye.
Commissioner Nevis.
Aye.
Commissioner Teria is excused. Chair Isla.
Aye.
Seven members present. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. There are no public testimonies received for this meeting. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So move. Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Seeing none, the motion is carried. Okay, so first up on the agenda is agenda item 2A for information only. Workshop discussion, the broadband basics and review of the notice of funding opportunity of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration's Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. And okay, Niniao is going to do the presentation. So mahalo, Niniao, please proceed. So you might want to introduce your guest first and then proceed.
Okay, aloha kakayaka. My name is Niniao Kwaihai, Special Assistant in the Office of the Chairman. I'm pleased to have with me all the way from New Mexico, our consultants, Amarin Critical Infrastructure, Jeff Blackwell, and Irene Flannery. This submittal this morning, we are going to review the Broadband 101, sort of like a quick overview of what broadband is. And then we'll go over the notice of funding opportunity, which details the eligible activities and the requirements for the department's application for the funding under the NTIA. I would just like to ask the commission to write down your questions as we go through the presentation, just so that we can, there's a lot of information and we can take questions at the end. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Niniao.
Jeff, Irene, I leave the PowerPoint to you.
Thank you, Niniao, and aloha. My name is Irene Flannery. I am the director of Amarin Critical Infrastructure, and Jeff Blackwell and I will be sharing the presentation to you today. So, Jeff.
Aloha. Hishche Chukma. Sohoshvat Jeffrey Blackwell. My name is Jeff Blackwell. I work as the General Counsel and Chief Strategy Officer for Amarin Critical Infrastructure. Both Irene and I I used to work at the Federal Communications Commission. Both of us have been office chiefs, senior managers, one of about a group of 30 that helped run the FCC, and have been involved in indigenous broadband development and projects at the federal, private, and tribal level for about 20 years together. So we put together this presentation. It is high level. It's designed to convey some basics. It is 101, but also to reassure the commission about the progress and about the opportunity and the importance of this unique timing for indigenous communities in the United States. There's never been a time in the history of indigenous affairs in the United States, whether it be Hawaiian natives or Alaska natives or American Indians, where there's been such an opportunity to bring broadband to communities and to do it in the way in which the communities desire to have it, the appropriate way, not for a way that a corporation or some non-indigenous entity desires. So happy to try to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Niniao, for holding questions until the end, but we are happy to dial into whatever level of detail you as a commission or any individual commission may have. Before I get started, I did want to say that just over the last week, I had the great honor and privilege of visiting Hawaii again. I had never been to Hawaii on a vacation. My wife and our daughters had never been to Hawaii. And we were able to spend time on Oahu and on Big Island. And for them to see places, unfortunately, because of some of the restrictions, we were not able to visit friends in Waimanalo or in Waianae or on Big Island, but we will be back. And hopefully my spouse will be back. She's witnessed our work for a long time, and it's a great opportunity. I also wanted to recognize that as your concept of ohana, my people share the same concept. In certain, my northern family, they call it the tioshpa, our larger family. And we know that our larger families right now are still continuing to deal with the effects of COVID. And I just want to recognize that we know that that's happening in the homelands, and we're going to do all that we can from where we sit and the issues that we're dealing with to try to help with that. So with that, I think we should get started on Broadband 101. Oh, have we lost the PowerPoint? Are folks seeing the PowerPoint? Would you like us to present it from this side?
One sec, Jeff. We're having a slight tech glitch, but they're bringing it right back up.
No problem, Deputy. Thank you. So before, I would say as a preamble to this 101, there is absolutely nothing about broadband that should be intimidating. Unfortunately, there are folks and vendors and there are providers who love to sling lingo. I think any industry has its terminology. These can be thought of as construction projects just like any other. However, rather than tile and shingle, brick and mortar, the construction really, we can go to the next slide. The construction is really about, it's using different types of infrastructure. We'll get into it. It's towers, it's electromagnetic spectrum frequencies, it's fiber, it's flexible glass, it's cabling, it's antennas and repeaters, and of course, handsets and laptops. All of these will have opportunity and impact in the homelands and potentially across all of Hawaii for Native Hawaiians writ large. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. One more. Sorry for all the intros. So there are some key terms that are being used right now in Congress, have been used for a while in the industry, and are also becoming very, very prevalent in society because the federal government is investing so many billions into the build out of broadband in rural and disconnected parts of the country, and particularly in Native and Indigenous communities. So it can support everything that helps make a community more healthy and bring the availabilities at distance involving education, healthcare, public safety. Those are three areas that are very, very important in the state of Hawaii. Also economic development. So the law that creates the monies that are these federal monies that DHHL is using specifically calls out economic development, education, and healthcare, of course. So this term last mile, sometimes in Indigenous communities, we actually use the term first mile because that's where our people are. And we think of our people first in creating the model to deploy to them. This is a term that gets used from the industry perspective as the last mile, because they tend to think of themselves as the corporations as the origination of this technology. So I can tell you from the very start, the concept that we follow here at Ameren, that all of our clients, that we work with all of our partners, and we work with the federal government still to make them understand, is that first mile, that last mile is the most important. That is often where you may find yourself walking around your kitchen or your living room trying to find a signal. This is the place where the internet comes to that home or that business. Middle mile is a very important element of connectivity that in many places is missing in the homelands. So you can think of middle mile much like you think about roads. That last mile is the driveway or the road that is in the neighborhood. The middle mile is that county road or state road. And that's what brings an amount of connectivity from the large major internet backbone into the community, where there is a transmission point where it goes from middle mile that goes to individual homes. So middle mile in a lot of places in the United States, because of the history of the way, I won't get terribly deeply into this, but I'll just tell you, because of the history of the way federal investments occurred during the 20th century and the very first decade of the 21st century, this middle mile didn't see a lot of build out that wasn't driven by an amount of population density and relative affluence. So let me say that a different way. When left up to economic forces where there wasn't federal investment or regulation or subsidy, largely what companies did was look at how many people live in this community and how much money can they pay? How wealthy are they? So that's what drove a lot of the deployment of middle mile. Think with me now, middle mile can both be, and last mile can both be wire. It can also be wireless. The wireless middle mile sometimes is a huge obstacle in rural and remote and Native America. So, as I said, it's getting from to a connection point in a city and a town from a particular community. Backhaul or transport is getting used a lot right now. It's an old familiar term that basically applies to those broadband interstate highways. And literally, you can think of great big trunks of fiber. Sometimes they're this big, sometimes they're actually this big. In California, where the big internet root servers, 7 of the 8 big internet, or it used to be 7 of the 8 big internet root servers for the entire world, there's massive amounts of trunks. And then once it comes into backhaul, for instance, we have seen where the undersea cables come ashore in the islands. They're pretty good size. And then it gets a little smaller. This can be, backhaul is usually, and transport is usually not wireless. That is usually cable and fiber. So these first 3 bullets are really terminology about where infrastructure occurs and therefore where it's needed and the types of infrastructure. It also relates in large part to budgetary authorizations and ultimately what builds up into a holistic plan for the homelands. This last bullet point is, as I referred to in the opening, it's all the different types of brick and mortar, actual touchy stuff you can put your hands on, the stuff you drive by, the stuff that you see that are actually going to be procured with the federal monies or contracted with federal monies. So fiber is essentially strands of flexible glass. A single fiber is the width of a thick piece of hair. My hair has been thinning over the last 20 years, so it's not quite, it's like maybe 4 strands of my hair. So, and then it comes from manufacturers, what, 244 strands.
Yeah. It starts as small as 12 and then goes up by an order of magnitude.
The federal government has an important thing to understand about fiber is fiber, this flexible glass, it carries a light signal through it. And literally, it has virtually limitless capacity that is limited only by the types of computer electronics that you have at either end. So again, sticking with the kind of highway and car analogy, if you have a Lamborghini, if you have Lamborghinis or Maseratis at either end, it's going to be very fast, but you can't really pick up a whole lot of groceries in a Lamborghini, right? If you have 18-wheeler pickup, if you have pickup trucks, you know how much you can haul back in a pickup truck. If you have 18-wheelers on it, and those 18-wheelers have supersized engines, then you've got a lot of transport. I would say one of the very important things to keep in mind about middle mile and backhaul transport is it's like that old movie that Kevin Costner made about the baseball, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. When connectivity comes to Native communities, actually Native Americans adopt technology at a higher rate than any other segment of society, including African Americans and Asian Americans. And while the study that I'm referencing in is an old study and it did not include Native Hawaiians, I have every reason to believe, from every ounce of experience I've ever had, once you bring backhaul transport and middle mile and last mile, all of a sudden communities start demanding more capacity. How much more can I download? How much faster speeds? What kind of bandwidth can we get? Fiber, therefore, it's very important to plan for the future and very important to make sure that the plan includes future proofing, that we're calibrating for future need, not just present need. Cable, it's the same thing that everybody remembers from cable TV. It got deregulated during the Reagan administration. Cable companies live in a similar world in that they have a very similar consumer base. They have very similar pathways to have built out over the last 30 years, looking for, again, population density and relative wealth. But cable has, because it's actually the old cable, it has some limitations compared to fiber. Obviously, it costs less, but it also, fiber, as they say, it gets easier to pay for over time. Wireless, everybody is familiar with wireless technology. Wireless was adopted by man on the face of the globe faster than probably, I once read a study that trying to compare historically the adoption of wireless technology versus the adoption of the wheel and the sail. And, you know, sailing around the world, there's so many Native Hawaiians that come from obviously so many different parts of the globe historically, and you understand that. Also comparing it to the bow and arrow, I mean, this historian, how do you compare it? But this historian, wireless technology in the space of 5 years went from something that was a $1,500 phone to being something that only the ultra rich and elite had to now everybody has 3 or 4. If you got on your laptop, you got your iPad, you got a work phone, you got a home phone. So the demand for wireless services is huge and ever growing. So you see this in 3G, 4G, 5G technology, and all those G's stand for generation. And basically the generation denomination is how much more capacity can you get to this little supercomputer that we carry in our pockets and in our purses. Fixed wireless, there's a lot of fixed wireless. If you watch for it in Hawaii, it's a great big dishes that sit up on point-to-point microwave is a classic example of fixed wireless backhaul, or mostly middle mile. But there is a lot of fixed wireless that can be last mile too. So getting a signal into a community, again, using the term middle mile, and then from a distribution point, having, for instance, having a community, and on the top of every home, there's an antenna receiver that gets a direct a reception from a distribution antenna. And then folks hook that antenna on the top of their roofs, or the company or the DHHL will be hooking that up on the top of the roofs that will go into the wiring in the home, and people connect in that way. There are a number of tribal communities that have used fixed wireless and have used all of these. Satellite is something right now that's getting a lot of play because we have a couple of billionaires who are pouring a lot of money into it, and they're going up and visiting the stratosphere. Satellite is a pretty impressive technology if you're running the Department of Defense. Otherwise, for a lot of other folks, it's extremely expensive in the long haul. But I'm very hopeful for what's being called low Earth orbit, or LEO satellite. It may be a great solution to some of the most remote parts of certain continents. But it is, and all apologies to my friends in the satellite industry and the Satellite Industry Association, while they say they can cover every part of the continent and of our islands and protectorates and everywhere in the United States, at what cost and at what capacity? In Alaska, for a long time, the whole state has experienced, especially in the middle part of Alaska, the effects of buffering. And when folks come home from work and the kids come home from school and everybody's on satellite, those birds get massive, they get choke points because there's only so much capacity that those satellites can handle. But all of these are technologies that are being considered by DHHL. We can go to the next slide. So here is a simple diagram that basically illustrates some of what we talked about with the terminology before. So if you look at in the foreground, these six, they look like six towers. They look like six skyscrapers. Those are really where backbone internet trunks. They look like different things. I've actually visited a couple of them. It's kind of scary to go visit them because you know that you're at ground zero. You know that there's a lot of money that's spent on them. But if this illustration illustrates both a government building, a municipal building, communities, a public safety point, a business point, and then splicing. So if you go over to the right, where you see the splice point, what you'll see is that backhaul to a middle mile, and then you see that fiber, it goes aerial. The reason why this is important as an illustration is, just as I saw last week as we were driving past Waikoloa, there's a lot of lava on the islands. I mean, there's a lot here in New Mexico. We deal with a lot of granite, which is sometimes it's just impossible to bore through. Of course, the best way of securing an investment like fiber is to put it in the ground, but sometimes that's just cost prohibitive. So there's a lot of fiber that goes aerial in certain parts of the country where it's just, like I said, just prohibitive to put it in. So you'll see fiber, and sometimes you see fiber on the same telephone lines, or you see fiber on new lines. There's a lot of the pole attachments, if you will. So that looks very familiar. It's just like what you would expect. Okay, if you go back to the area node where it breaks off and goes into the community, to homes and to past the government building, those are essentially that's fiber as well. That is a goal in many communities. Fiber to the prem, buried you're future-proofed. It is highly likely that in this federal funding, and I do have some updates from that I'd be happy to make at the end of this Broadband 101, because the Senate passed this morning an infrastructure bill, and we do have some of the latest information on that. That solution, when you bring fiber into community, that brings a couple of different types of solutions. Where it's feasible and where it makes sense, you can do fiber to the premises. That used to be called fiber to the home, but there are a lot of governments and municipal buildings that are because of their needs, especially during COVID, there's a higher demand for fiber to the premises. There are also, for instance, in the state of Hawaii, we've been a part of discussions in helping in the fact finding and information gathering, supporting DHHL, meeting with other areas of the native Hawaiian community and with state government. There are, for instance, libraries that said, look, we would like to be a central distribution point. If you can get fiber to us, we would be willing to co-locate on our building or on our tower to help send a signal into the community. So therefore DHHL can save on spending its money elsewhere. Fiber also, sometimes when it's not feasible and fiber to the home, you can turn into a wireless solution. So for instance, like I said before, getting a antenna, getting fiber into a particular part of the community, setting up an antenna and receivers on individual homes. This is probably going to be a good solution where the demand might be manageable well into the future, where there might not be as many homes or as many, as many homesteads, as many, where there might be limited growth potential there. So the demand on that service, that circuitry won't be, won't limit those homes and what they want to do. At the other end in the upper left-hand corner is kind of a classic. I'm sure you've seen that tower. That's actually a latticed tower. Towers are referred to as latticed or monopole. I've always wondered, why does the industry call them monopoles rather than just poles? But those are the big round things that you see. Those are point-to-point microwaves. And it's literally some of the same frequencies that you would use to cook your food in your house, a microwave. Now that can send a signal backhaul, middle mile, and then you see in the public safety building and it looks like maybe a barber shop under the word provider. You have you have a fire department and you have a local business who can get that signal wirelessly, just like a home would. So this illustration is one that actually the federal government has used itself. It's public domain information. It came along with an old informational piece. It's about 6 years old from the Department of Commerce about the levels of funding that they had at that point in time and what market rates should be. What's happening right now, because of the government investing billions in broadband, is that everybody right now is watching what's happening with vendors and with manufacturers, because it's highly likely that prices are going to go up. So one of the things that we are calibrating for with DHHL, with Niniao, and with the deputy is to make sure that if there is advantageous contracting, if there is availability for indigenous purchasing, not just government purchasing, that we position DHHL to be able to get that. 11 years ago, when the ARA Stimulus Act came out, there were a couple of providers who allowed tribal governments and indigenous organizations, gave them discounted pricing. We're not seeing that yet. I think people are trying to figure out what things are going to cost, and particularly in a state like Hawaii. So next slide. So this is a slide that's just going to build on, again, some of the terminology that we talked about specific to wireless infrastructure. And this is important for a couple of reasons. The first is Department of Hawaiian Homelands has a great advantage in this, in that the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is a licensee, is a licensee of the Federal Communications Commission for the 2.5 gigahertz licenses. Those licenses came at absolutely no cost to DHHL, except for DHHL and tribal governments and tribal entities on the continent and in Hawaii. In Alaska, all of the other entities in the United States had to pay for the licenses, had to win them at auction. But for all of the homelands, with the exception of Oahu, because there weren't frequencies available, they were already licensed to the University of Hawaii and other educational institutions. DHHL has a wonderful opportunity already in hand with 2.5 gigahertz. So that's what makes this slide important. And before I get into it, on Oahu, we are looking at other types of licensing opportunities. So there are kind of a couple of things that can be done with these wireless licenses. The first is actually, it isn't on the slide, but the first is you can actually use 2.5 gigahertz the way that AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile have used their spectrum as well, and create what a lot of people are referring to as an LTE service. And the next slide will illustrate that a little bit more, but let's not go there yet. So you can actually deploy a wireless network much like much like a statewide or nationwide carrier. That may be the case in certain communities, but in certain homelands, but it might not be of much value in others because of the nature of the way that the homelands are, well, because of their geography. It may be much more advantageous for the homelands to utilize, and I'm saying this politely, it's likely going to be, it is going to be more advantageous in many different ways to use point-to-point with backhaul and point-to-multipoint. So I've already referenced these, but here's another illustration. So look at the illustration. So you've got this internet backbone, the cloud. What a great piece of marketing. The cloud is, just think of it as, yes, it's somebody else's server somewhere. All of these big companies have them. Google has huge, server farms, data farms. So then it goes from the internet backbone, the internet highway, superhighway, into the local ISP, internet service provider, the internet provider. And that's where you start beginning to see the changeover from backhaul to middle mile. Now, here you have typically it would be a fiber going to one of those poles and up. And there is a point-to-point backhaul link. So literally you have construction, you have folks that install these things that get up on these towers, and they're literally aiming 1.5 degrees for miles across to get that signal backhaul and middle mile link. One other thing that was not in this illustration that you need to be aware of is there is an important relationship. Wherever these towers go also have to have good power, a lot of power. So any tower, there are 4 things. You need the tower, you need the spectrum, you need the internet, good backhaul, and you need power. So as we've worked through the analysis and looking at it's actually boiled down to actually looking at GIS files, looking at mapping, boring down into, okay, at the end of this road, where's the tower? Whose tower is this? Is that a county tower? Is that a provider tower? Where do we know that the utility line is? Where's the utility? Do we need to construct a new tower? Can we co-locate on somebody else's tower? So let's say that this tower with the point-to-point backhaul, that's owned by the ISP. But this point-to-multipoint tower, that could be, if DHHL needs to build it, DHHL builds it, or we lease on a current or some other facility. Sometimes you see antennas also on water towers. You'll see them on tall buildings. I saw them all over Oahu. I mean, in Honolulu, there were a number of buildings that have, antenna repeaters on top of them. And then you have the same concept as before. This is just a little bit more spelled out. From the point, this is your central distribution. You can think of it like the old radio, like the radio that we all know and love, 88 to 107.9. And receivers that dial in that signal for broadband. And there's a lot of opportunity here under this authority, under this budgetary authority for schools, government, health services, emergency services, housing, and everything in between. One other way, this last sort of point at the bottom of this slide, it's a very important opportunity that DHHL is considering also, that being a license holder, it's a great advantage because that is a asset that goes on the balance sheet. There are a number of licensees in the 2.5 gigahertz that are being approached right now by carriers to sublease the spectrum, to essentially lease that spectrum and build out for the licensee. So there may be, there could be, it's going to be determined by cost and it's going to be determined by opportunity, but sometimes it's also a valuable thing to design part of a network so that it does derive recurring revenue. And right now we know that there are carriers, we've been aware of them and involved in a couple of conversations where carriers have reached out both in on the continent about subleasing. And that is very much like, you can think of that as just exactly the same way you sublease an apartment. I mean, but it comes with the requirement that the sublessor build out and meet the obligations of the license. So I think the next slide is the last slide in this little 101. And this is that's a lot of busy, right? But just take a little bit, just take 10 seconds with your eyes and look at everything. So you do have in the middle, the yellow arrows, that represents your middle mile. Obviously the backhaul is not illustrated here, but from these towers and antenna repeaters, there's the opportunity to really truly build a robust network. I would reiterate the important part of the design is that it's a community-oriented design. The ideology is to develop designs that are based in community needs, not in corporate needs. And those are unique to every community. I can tell you I have the honor of co-chairing the National Congress of American Indians Technology and Telecommunications Subcommittee. I also chair the parent committee of that, Economic Finance and Community Development. And in those committees, we deal with finance, we deal with transportation infrastructure, housing, and broadband. And every one of our subcommittees understands the unique relationship between broadband and modern availability of services. So we have communities that are making sure that they get broadband Wi-Fi along their transportation routes, along their roads, so that when people are away, if there's something that happens, they can still log in. They can still be on Wi-Fi in their cars while they're commuting or going to town or going wherever they need to go. So this is just eventually what the ideology is to grow, but every bit of it be rooted in the community. So thank you very much for that part of it. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of it. I think the next section is Irene's on the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Grant Program. Mahalo.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. If we could go to the next slide. The current big funding opportunity is called the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Grant Program. This has been the focus within the last number of months since we've been working with DHHL of much of our planning and determining how to apply for the funds and what to apply for. The Tribal Broadband Connectivity Grant Program was created at the end of 2020 as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, with one of the last pieces of legislation that was signed by the previous president. This grant opportunity is being administered through the U.S. Department of Commerce through one of their divisions called NTIA. It's the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. That's a mouthful. So we just call them NTIA. Part of their process, so the statute defined and identified NTIA as the administrator and then set up a series of deadlines within the statute. And the first deadline was NTIA was responsible for creating and releasing what we call the NOFO, or the Notice of Funding Opportunity. This was actually supposed to be released within 90 days of the legislation being signed, which would have been in February. But the NOFO was not released until June 3rd of this year. One of the most important things here is that the application deadline is coming up very soon on September 21st. And we have been working with DHHL since the beginning of the year to plan for this opportunity and this grant application. We could go to the next slide, please. And there are a number of purposes. I won't go through and read each one of these, but what's important to know is that this program was created as a response to COVID. So you'll notice then that included within these enumerated purposes for the program, it's really responding to the focus that as a result of COVID, while we all knew that there were disparities and huge disparities in connectivity in different parts of the country, particularly in tribal and Native communities, COVID really made that a reality and really shone a light on the disparities. So you'll see that the purpose is to, for example, facilitate things like remote employment, being able to work from home, being able to go to school from home, being able to receive your health care from home. And all of these purposes are to be accomplished by generally expanding broadband access and providing digital training and inclusion programs across Indian country and across Native Hawaiian communities. We could go to the next slide, please. So first of all, who's eligible? Well, of course, as you'll see highlighted there, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is identified as an eligible entity on behalf of the Native Hawaiian community. And this includes Native Hawaiian education programs. But as you'll see, there are a number of other, it is only tribal or Native entities, tribal governments or Native governments, Native Hawaiian, or a subset of the government that is eligible to apply. So for example, a tribal government could apply, a tribal college or university, Alaska Native Corporation, a tribal organization. But with respect to Hawaii, the statute specifically called out the Department of Hawaiian Homelands as the eligible entity on behalf of the Native Hawaiian community. If we could go to the next slide, please. In terms of the level of funding, this is essentially a $1 billion program. There will be $980 million available. There was some administrative cost that was allowable for NTIA. But most important here, again, what is highlighted, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and Native Hawaiians were the only entity that had a specific amount of money set aside. So what the statute said is that not less than 3% of that $980 million, or not less than $30 million, is set aside for the benefit of Native Hawaiians. What that means is the $30 million is a floor, but not a ceiling. So DHHL can apply for more than $30 million, but they are eligible on behalf of Native Hawaiians for not less than $30 million of that roughly $1 billion. There are two different kinds of projects that are allowable under this grant. One is what's called broadband infrastructure deployment projects, and the other is broadband use and adoption projects. And we'll go a little bit more into that on another slide. But in the NOFO, NTIA did set out, now these are just ranges. These aren't absolute minimums or absolute maximums, but ranges. So for infrastructure projects, the range is from $1 million to $50 million. If you apply for something more than that, the NTIA just requires justification. For use and adoption projects, the range again is $50,000 to $2.5 million of the total application. It would be a single application that would include both of these components. The time frame, and this came from the statute as well, is 1 year. But with respect to broadband infrastructure deployment, and that's really, building out that infrastructure that Jeff was just talking about. We all know that construction projects generally take way more than a year, particularly in a COVID environment where the supply chain is really very limited right now. So applicants have the opportunity to request an extension, apply for an extension for the broadband infrastructure programs. And you can actually do that as part of the application as opposed to waiting for a little further down the road. Next slide, please. Now, I'm not going to go through every one of these details, but with respect to the infrastructure deployment program or projects, these are the kinds of things that NTIA articulated in terms of what would be eligible. So for example, as Jeff was talking about, broadband infrastructure, whether that's wireless infrastructure, whether that's fiber, the deployment of that infrastructure on tribal lands and in Native communities is eligible. And we were just talking about middle mile, last mile, construction of networks that facilitate all that, that's all eligible under the infrastructure portion of this grant project. So projects can either, in some communities, will be starting from scratch or perhaps replacing outdated infrastructure or upgrading and extending something, infrastructure that's already there. So as Jeff was mentioning, the 2.5 gigahertz licenses that DHHL, there are 5 licenses that were awarded to DHHL. Projects that utilize those licenses, and there are certain build out requirements that come with the licenses, that is eligible under this grant opportunity. Jeff mentioned the different kinds of infrastructure. You'll see those mentioned here. It's very important that the priority, what Congress said and what NTIA expanded upon in their NOFO, is that the priority must be currently unserved households. And the way that NTIA defines that is based on speed, on internet speed, which is, they use the FCC standard of 25.3. So the priority, what NTIA will be looking at as they're reviewing applications is, are currently unserved households being prioritized? They're not looking for projects that are just going to build where there already is connectivity. They really want to get to those communities that are not currently served. And they're also looking at certain things that hopefully these projects will promote and will extend, like economic development, education, telehealth, being able to work from home. And there's also a big emphasis on sustainability. So what NTIA is looking at is, when they're reviewing these projects, they want to have each of the applications say, well, how is this going to last for the long term? We're going to invest a lot of money, and how are you going to make sure that this investment will continue to provide connectivity to the community for years to come? So those are the infrastructure projects. And then if we could go to the next slide, please. The broadband use and adoption projects. Those focus not so much on infrastructure in the ground or infrastructure on poles, but making use of broadband and expanding the use of broadband, whether that would be distance learning, so that children who are going to school from home have the connectivity so that they actually can participate in classroom activities. Things like expanding broadband education. So it's one thing to have a device, but to actually understand how to use it and all of the uses for it. Things like devices, like laptops and tablets, those would be eligible here under the use and adoption portion. Also, if bullet number 2, this is an important one as well, to be able to provide affordable broadband programs. So one thing that NTIA has identified that would be eligible is if an applicant would like to, for that 1 year, remember these projects are limited to 1 year, although I believe in the new, Jeff will talk in a couple minutes about the infrastructure bill that the Senate just passed today. I believe there may be an adjustment to that. But providing affordable broadband programs would include paying to provide for free or reduced price cost to individual homes within the community. And you can see there are just a number of other things that fall within. Broadband use and adoption is a bit broader in some respects than infrastructure, but really focused on the use of broadband and the adoption by individual citizens and by the community. And the whole purpose of all of this is to benefit, as it says at the bottom, Native American, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian communities on tribal lands. We could go to the next slide. That may be, I think that was it.
Yeah. So I can very quickly, before questions. So the Senate, the long and the short story of what the Senate just passed today is an infrastructure bill. You probably read all of the same national reporting that we've read over the last several weeks. There was a point in time where the administration was proposing trillions of dollars. It's a $1 trillion bill that got passed. The skinny is that basically with the August recess and with hundreds of proposed amendments, the agreement was to do very few amendments. The feedback that I received from our staffer and at NCAI who tracking and working with the Senate is that they basically only took about 3 amendments. It ends up with about $65 billion for broadband, and in that only about there was the idea, and for a long time the advocacy I participated in myself, spoke to members of both the House and the Senate in meetings over the last couple months. The original figure was $2 billion to add to the tribal broadband connectivity program. The idea was to get that legislation introduced and then introduce multiple amendments, including one that would increase that total figure, the total spend for native broadband to about $6 billion. That did not happen. So there is an additional $2 billion in this Senate version that will be going to NTIA for the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. I haven't seen the language, so we haven't seen the breakout yet or how they treat DHHL, but the law is already created in the Consolidated Appropriations Act. So we know that will be available. So we know that DHHL is going to be applying for more than 30 million. You could say that for sure. There are a couple of other things that are there's additional money that is going to a program at the FCC called EBB, the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. Well, I think it's close to it's over 3 billion. I'm sorry, I saw so many numbers. I apologize. It was very quickly the download.
The current one is 3.2.
Yeah, 3.2 in the Senate version. What's important, and I think what we need to spend a little bit of time, maybe not immediately because of this deadline on September 1st, but there was no carrier that that applied for the emergency broadband benefit to my last knowledge. I don't think there's an EBB provider that applied.
Not for most of the homelands.
Not for most of the homelands. So there may be an interesting strategic play there in between the ability of the broadband use and adoption program and the EBB program that's over at our, Irene used to run the program that they built EBB on. The other thing that is important going back to the additional $2 billion is they have extended, the legislation extends the timeframes for the build out. There are a lot of tribal governments right now that are saying, look, we're seeing a recurrence of COVID. You guys were supposed to get the NOFO out in 90 days. It was more than 180 days before we saw the NOFO. Now there are other federal programs, everything's happening. We may need more time than September 1st. NTIA, I'm sure, is going to be getting some advocacy on that point. it looks as though what Congress is, what the Senate has done at least, is extend the construction timeframes, taking into account what everybody is understanding. It's going to be a crush for materials and construction times. The great advantage in Hawaii is that you have virtually a 365-day construction period. Not the same in Alaska, not the same in New Mexico. So, so that's the good news and the bad news. Unfortunately, like so many things that happen in Washington, things are bipartisan only to a point, and then also sometimes August recess and just the timing of the clock runs. That having been said, my information is that just like you, I'm sure that you've seen in the press as well, things are a little bit more up in the air in the House. So it's important. We will be talking to, the tribal nations will be talking to their friends in the House. I think, however, it's, the question will be whether or not this passes or not whether or not there will be additional added to it in the House. But everything that we'll learn will, of course, keep Niniao and the deputy and the chair up to speed on. But that passed, what, just about 3 hours ago. And as soon as we get the language, we will make sure and share it. You may also receive it directly from Senator Schott. So if you do, we shall see. But that's the latest. Niniao, happy to answer any questions. Mahalo.
Okay, thank you. Who said, is that Randy? I see Randy's hands up. Go ahead, Randy.
Yes, so Jeff, Irene, thank you for that presentation. It is a boatload of information, and I'm not going to pretend to have understood every single piece, but what I do, my current takeaway is that there are a lot of benefits to this technology. I mean, that's clear. But I would be remiss if I did not put onto the record concerns raised by our Native Hawaiian beneficiaries from Wai'ehu Code 1, 2, and 3, objecting to a tower that went up right in the middle of our complex of neighborhoods. And so the concern is the result of well, let me back up. Is broadband going to be utilizing 5G technology?
So there is the possibility of utilizing 5G. A lot of the planning right now, however, is not that LTE deployment model. It's not the 5G LTE. It's more the point to multi-point and point to point that we've discussed.
Okay, so I think that's helpful, and I'm going to put this on the public record because when the concern about the tower being placed in the middle of our Native Hawaiian beneficiary homesteads, which is Wai'ehu Codes 1 through 4, a petition effort was set up, and nearly 200 people signed up. The vast majority, I understand, are from Wai'ehu Code 1 through 3. And as a result, a few of us attended a planning commission meeting with the County of Maui. And I would describe the manner in which we were treated as very dismissive, arrogant, and not really wanting to hear from the beneficiaries who were trying to represent everybody else on that petition. We also learned, as in some ways, they can be arrogant because the federal government makes it very difficult for communities to object to the perceived dangers that 5G brings to their community. And the perceived danger is the result of 5G signals traveling a much shorter distance, if I understand that correctly, than the more traditional 4G signals. And therefore, cell boxes are required to connect all those signals. And there's an expectation that those boxes, well, let me rephrase that. I guess in certain communities throughout the nation, they're alleging that these cell boxes are going through their neighborhoods, being put on homes, being put on office buildings, etc. And the concern is the radio frequency radiation that may cause potential harm to people has been cause for communities to oppose 5G. So I just want to get it on record that the experience of those beneficiaries who have tried to address this health concern, it's left a bad taste in their mouth because of the way they've been treated so far. They've been accused of fear mongering in spite of publications that support their concern. You know, one such publication comes from the Scientific American, which is a publication that's been around since 1845. And they're raising the alarm about the dangers of 5G technology, radio frequency radiation, and what it means to living organisms, including Hawaiians. And why Hawaiians are concerned in Wai'ehu is because we already have a high incidence, a propensity toward cancer and other health challenges. So you may not have an answer for me, but I just want to put it on the record that this remains an unresolved concern with those beneficiaries who have come to me seeking answers and seeking support for the concerns they have raised. So thank you.
Thank you, Randy, for putting that on the record and bringing it to the attention. I just want to make one clarification. The tower is on private property and not in the homestead, just so that everybody understands that the department did not approve the site. It was the county with whoever the provider is, and it's across the street, is very close. I don't want to diminish your concerns, but the tower is not on DHHL land. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, William. That's a point I forgot to mention. It is not. It's very close to the highway, which makes it close to our homesteads. And you know, the question, of course, was why there. I do want to acknowledge and thank Joby for setting up a follow-up meeting with one of the representatives from AT&T. We did have a discussion. The long and short of it was she was very professional, very polite, but there was no budging, right, from the decision that the tower is going to remain there no matter what. So as a result, we have a demographic representing Hawaiian homes that are concerned and troubled by what they have experienced so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. We'll go to Dennis, and then I see Niniao has her hands up after Dennis.
Yeah, Jeff and Irene, thank you for the presentation. I would look at what Randy's talking about is something that was, you know, someone else driving the bus. I would put it as, since we're driving the bus within our communities, that we have a responsibility under the beneficiary consultation to make sure that what we put there is acceptable. So I would hope that moving forward, and I'm sure in your tribal communities you have the same concern, is that whatever type of infrastructure we put in, that it's acceptable on a health-wise concern to the community as well. So So I think it depends on who's driving the bus, and we can only control, what's within our jurisdiction. So, yeah, it'd be a bad taste in people's mouth if we decided to do that within our community, and I'm sure you understand that. But I would support what Randy's saying. We're talking about, or Commissioner Woe, we're talking about an entity that's right next door that we may oppose, but we really can't. That's sort of that commercial entity that you spoke of earlier. This is now a homestead tribal entity, and we're developing and creating our community. So I'm thankful we're moving in that direction. I did have going back to some of the basics, just a question on the Broadband 101. When we talk about the internet backbone, the ISP internet provider, and then we talk about the point-to-point, where in that diagram is DHHL's position?
So I'd like to pick up with your analogy. Not only are you driving the bus, DHHL is creating the bus, is designing the bus. It's not just the driver, but it's what kind of bus do you want?
Right. So does it start at the ISP?
It may very well in certain places. In other places, it's likely going to be an extension and purchasing that backhaul from somebody else. But think about it, Commissioner, come with me on this journey. Think about it first, start with the home and that first mile from the home, and then that middle mile. Because if you think about it that way, you'll think, all right, well, we're taking care of our people first, and then we're taking care of where we want the middle mile to go. And if that's the wrong place to put something, then we don't put it there. We put it there.
I've got to reverse my Western thinking.
Exactly. Hey, look, I used to work at the FCC. I used to bathe in this stuff. So
I'm back to taro planning, so you can see where I'm at.
Oh, absolutely. One of the great advantages you have at DHHL compared to a lot of tribal governments is you actually have greater flexibility in terms of land.
Good.
In terms of affecting and determining. One of the things so we had a follow-up meeting as well, Commissioner Awo, I want to make sure and thank you for your comment, because it's highly relevant. It's exactly the reason why I started with a community deployment oriented ideology rather than corporate. We're not looking for fast and easy and quick and where to put this stuff just to put it. No, we're absolutely looking to try to right size. I had committed to you, Commissioner, after our conversation, that I would reach back out to my colleagues at the FCC who are responsible for the radio frequency emission regulations for not just 5G, but also 2.5 gigahertz. And I reached out to them the way that you can to old friends and colleagues and say, hey, look, what's the latest? What's going on? What's this rulemaking? Are you guys aware that this situation, it's not just, so yes, we are going to make sure, because we are the drivers of the bus, we are creating the bus, everybody on this call, but we're also going to make sure that those emissions are compliant with federal regulation. We're also going to make sure, however, that in citing things that we don't overbuild, that it's properly calibrated. And like I said, there may be places because of concerns about RF emissions or just the capacity of wireless where it might be better to put fiber, at least for backhaul. That's a challenge in Hawaii. That is a challenge. I will underscore it a couple times here, and I'll give you an example that comes from two other states. In the state, and Irene can well tell you this because she's managed several projects. Fiber, the cost of fiber per mile here in the state of New Mexico is about $120,000 a mile. In the state of California, it's about $250,000 per mile. By and large, most of the costs, as we are understanding them, as they become more evident and kind of become a little uncloaked, and as we do more in the due diligence and investigation looking in Hawaii, we know a fair amount because we know how to mine the federal data. We used to be responsible for those programs. the costs in Hawaii are closer more to California prices than they are. So I just want to make sure that yes, absolutely, your bus analogy is correct. The answer to your second question is a little more, it depends on the homeland, it depends on the island, depends what else is there. Like Irene said, this federal program is priority to get unconnected communities, unserved communities connected. Another important priority is not to overbuild or double build or double down on. So we do have a situation where great flexibility to be able to address needs. It gets complex, but I love the complexity. This is like what we do. So hopefully that answers your question, Commissioner.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. So I don't want to be the Debbie Downer, but we may be building a bus, but somebody else is financing it and they have some very strict deadlines for us. So it's okay to think about what we can plan and do all of that, but we have to keep the tight deadlines in place and understand that we are under extreme scrutiny to make sure that we can pull these projects off, because that's going to determine whether or not additional future monies come our way for the next, I would guess, 20 or 30 years. So not to be the Debbie Downer, but I've got to reintroduce reality into this situation. Niniao?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add additional information to what you and Commissioner Avo shared. And, you know, the tower near Waiahuko, the 5G, is with AT&T under FirstNet. FirstNet came to the Governor's Interstate Indian Council, I think like 6 years ago, to talk about how they were developing a nationwide cell system to connect first responders, police, fire, etc. So I think it's important, like you stated, Mr. Chairman, that the tower is built on private land, plus it is a part of a different nationwide program to increase cellular mobile access to first responders.
Randy and then Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Niniao would be correct. The tower placement is the result of the FirstNet initiative, which is to give first responders better communications during an emergency. Nonetheless, the decision to put it where it is, it's a sore spot for our beneficiaries. And so I just want to continue to make that point, because I just spoke to some of the leaders this morning and it's an unresolved issue. I have a question though, recognizing the timelines that are before us. You know, and Sandwich Isles, they're all fiber optic driven. Is that correct, William? It's a fiber optic system?
Partially fiber optic. There's some older copper lines in their system also.
Okay, because I now realizing we're still in litigation, I'm just wondering how much of that fiber optic we can utilize as part of this broadband build out. And I guess that goes to Jeffrey.
Let me answer the question. Excuse me, Randy. I think it is part of the equation. However, there's an asterisk by it because we have to see how the litigation unfolds. So it's something that's being taken into consideration as possible backhaul. But again, we have to wait for the litigation to complete itself.
Okay, thank you.
Mahalo, Randy. Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jeffrey and Irene, for your guys' presentation. I wanted to first ask about the NOFO. So the application deadline is September 1st. So do we have a completed application ready for submittal?
I don't believe so. I believe that we are in the process of completing the application right now.
Okay, and is that something that the commission will have to approve to move forward?
I don't
Once we've
believe
done that.
so. Yeah, I don't believe so, but we will be bringing a resolution for the commission to, I'll let the deputy,
To approve, the resolution is the consent necessary from the commission to consent to DHHL applying for the NTIA monies. So that'll be on the regular agenda next week. And
Yeah,
released
that's a-
today in your packets, actually. Your meeting packets for next week, you'll have the resolution already.
Okay, thank you. And so Jeffrey, I think you mentioned that we are considering applying for more than 30 million. Any idea of what number we're considering?
So one of the unique opportunities in this authorization, one thing I think you should be aware of as a commission is what everybody in the United States is dealing with this particular piece of legislation because of the way, how do I say this? How quickly it came together, how fast this was written. There is a great deal of unstated legislative intent in this law that every state in the union is dealing with that has tribal lands or eligible entities within it. So there is a wonderful opportunity. I'll say this as opportunity. I agree, of course, with what Chairman Isla said about the challenges. That's what we do here at ACI. That's what we did at the FCC, is meet deadlines. But the opportunity for a program, the opportunity for programmatic opportunities, and for providing for more of those programs for Native Hawaiians, both on and off the homelands. So yeah, we're going to apply for more than 30. The idea, not quite there yet. I'd really like to see, in a perfect world, the House adopts the law and it gets passed and signed here in a week and we all have a clear path forward. In a perfect world, for those that need a little more time, they'll get a little more time from NTIA. For those that don't need more time, we get some, we move forward. But the 30 million is a floor. I will reiterate, however, what the sheriff said. We got to get a good base to get a good program that the government will respect and fund further into the future. A little bit of insight from former time at the FCC relates to the question that the chair asked about another provider on the homelands. We'll have to see how that plays out with Sandwich Isles, but it's not to replace them, it's to build a community network and to create community programs. And right now you can spend 30 million pretty quickly. Hopefully that's a good answer. I personally like some of the ideas that Niniao and others on the team have come up with in terms of programs to help pay for that year of services. And hopefully if it gets adopted further, we can help pay for services, or this program, not we, but the benefit can help pay for it into the future. I will say, however, Commissioner, the idea is to build a carrier grade network that is community driven.
Thank you, Mike.
Jeffrey. No,
Is
I'm
that-
not done. No, Chair. I
Yeah,
still
Mike,
have
go
a-
ahead.
Yeah, this is for you, Chair. So with regards to communications towers and infrastructure, do we have any of these towers on our Hawaiian homelands?
There is infrastructure by other providers on some of our lands. And so that's part of the information that has been gathered to see what exists now, so that when a plan is put forward, we don't recreate the wheel or we don't pay for additional towers that are not necessary. So the answer is yes. There's also utility poles that could possibly be used, either put in by HECO or Hawaiian Tel. And then there's, of course, the other major carriers, Hawaiian yeah, spectrum that may have backhaul services near us.
And do we have, do we know if we have technology that's 5G that's being used on these infrastructure, or is it like older technology, 4G, or maybe just hardwires? I'm just curious about that. I want to get to the 5G question.
Sure. Well, commissioners, hope everybody's healthy and well. Some of the infrastructure that is not ours on our lands may include 5G. But I think like Jeff said earlier, right now, the primary focus of what we're trying to deploy is not 5G technology, right? So yes, it may exist on Hawaiian homelands in limited instances on existing infrastructure that is not ours. But as we move forward, I don't think the discussions include building out more 5G technology as it stands. That doesn't preempt us from maybe one day considering it, but I think for now, that's not part of the discussion.
I think I wanted to lead up to, I want to just comment on what Commissioner Owo shared, about the concerns from our beneficiaries. I think it'd be good to know, where 5G is located, so our beneficiaries are aware of that. And I wanted to just mention that I've been to a couple hearings on Hawaii County about building towers, and these weren't, one location I recall, or two locations, was not near Hawaiian homes, but there are concerns from the general community about 5G. Now, I think it would be helpful for us to even understand a little bit more about 5G and the concerns. What's the difference between 5G and 4G? And it's not like 5G's been around, I think, for some time all over the US. And FCC, I believe, oversees the safety aspects of all of that. There must be other reports. I mean, Commissioner Owo mentioned Scientific Journal and the concerns there. There must be other journals or studies or reports that I think would be helpful. It seems like communication to all of us, to beneficiaries, is lacking, because there's these concerns out there. That's my thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Mike. It's also, the science is all over the place on this right now. So there's no definitive source that you can go through, but we can take a look at making all of the science that are put together by the different points of view and make that available to you folks. Okay.
Chairman, if I may, there's an important point that I think I should make right now, not to open up a can of worms, but I think it's important for the commission to understand that it's not a zero-sum game when it comes to 5G. And this is something that Commissioner Owo, in the meeting that we were involved in with Commissioner Owo, or that we talked about. It's about complying and making sure there's compliance with those emissions levels. So yes, 5G is a technology that is usually deployed at this stage in the deployment in more densely populated areas, because they're trying to create a mesh network where you can have much higher speeds on your phone and on your device. So if those emission levels are at the right level, actually, because you have more distribution points, and they're about the size of pizza boxes, the power levels don't have to be as high as they did in the 3G era or in the 4G era, where you have one tower and a central distribution point. If you think about that one illustration that we had, where you have a point to multi-point. So, and I think the other commissioner is correct. The problem is, in their rush to deploy, AT&T did not dialogue with the community and explain how they're going to deploy it and at what power levels, and explain where and why these are going, to make sure that the community is reassured that this is being deployed responsibly and accurately and appropriately under the engineering rules. So so there may be a monetary question about 5G. There is clearly an engineering requirement question all of these to make sure that the community gets healthy services. Because yes, there are providers that right now, rather than providing 5G because they don't want to go places where there isn't population density and there isn't wealth, they're cranking up the volume. And so you get that classic, some of us are old enough to remember, of course, over-the-air television, where you had those great big tall towers that were real skinny and had the red flashing lights on them. And occasionally, if UHF was going, you'd hear about, oh, well, there were some birds that got killed, you know, trying to nest near this tower. So there is the potential that 5G, there is a deployment of 5G that actually can be safer than a big central blast point. The commissioner and Commissioner Awa and I talked a lot about, you know, how far would I be comfortable living from a tower and at what levels? So I just want to make sure that when the chair says there's a lot of science and it's all over the place, there's a lot of factors that go into making sure that you have a healthy community deployment. There's a reason why the FCC also has an enforcement bureau, and they drive around measuring emissions levels. It's not just for piracy, it's also to make sure that it's at safe levels. And I am familiar with that 2018 study from Scientific American where they exposed rats to certain levels of 3 different types of frequencies. And it did develop in that lab study certain types of cancerous tumors. And that is exactly the kind of research that the commission, that the FCC conducts in its wireless licensing bureaus. So we are well aware of the depth of the complexity behind that, and we are here to make sure that your issues as a commission are addressed. And it's very curious that that's a FirstNet tower. It got deployed in the county. It got deployed under some quickie regulations that allow the companies to move very quickly under FCC rules. Regardless of whether or not we use that legal ability at the FCC, we're going to do it in a responsible way. And it will be transparent to the commission. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Zach, then Dennis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, our guest speakers. Really appreciate your presentation. I just wanted to mention, you know, that my concern is, of course, the health and safety and welfare of our beneficiaries. And, you know, I think this is, as Commissioner Wo has mentioned, that, you know, it does not only affect our people, but where the tower is, it affects those people that live near the tower. They're non-Hawaiians as well. But, you know, I think the process, we really need to be more involved in the process. And the county, for example, County of Maui should, you know, assist our people and allow us to share our concerns and move forward, because it's, you know, it's critical. It's, you know, we already have a lot of health issues in our people, you know, and this is adding another one, you know. So I just wanted to mention that. And also I wanted to ask the speakers, you know, are you optimistic about the Congress moving forward to maybe not only support the Senate bill for infrastructure and broadband? Would you think they would pass it?
I am optimistic. Of course, I'm kind of an optimistic guy anyway, but we did have a conversation about a month ago with Congressman Tom Cole. He's a Chickasaw and a Republican who's been in the House for 20 years. He's been the chair of the RNC. And when Deborah Haaland moved from the House in a very prominent position for Native Americans over to the administration and to run Interior, Congressman Cole, whom I've known I'm part Chickasaw, whom I've known for all 20 years, and so he's been in Congress. We asked him for his support, and we asked to make sure that these provisions are in there. And he said he did believe that there would be agreement in the House. And what he said has also kind of come true. He's not sure about the 3 trillion. He was more thinking more like a trillion. So I think the big surprise, Commissioner, has been that there have been some entities that have lobbied against the Native perspective and the Native need, that we have received enough, or that we've gotten more than, I mean, and some of this stuff you hear word of mouth, right? It's not played out in the media. But yes, I am. And I am maybe as much as any Indian that I know. I spent time on the homelands, and I am very happy, I will say, to have a Hawaiian as the chair of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee again. It's a healthy perspective on the needs of Native America. But yeah, I think the House is going to get it. It's a slim margin in the House, but something that passed with a healthy majority, and even with the former Senate majority voting for it in the Senate, has a very good chance. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Irene. You know, I mean, you mentioned about how costly fiber optic is. You know, 1 mile is going to $100 and something thousand. Or it's crazy. So $30 million is not going to go very far for Hawaii, but it's a start.
Well, what I will say to, and this is something that the chairman has nailed me down on several times. I'm sure, like I have had the privilege of chairing a board. The chair did a very good job of nailing us down on timing and measurement. You're right. This is very expensive. One does not measure once, twice. One measures 5, 6, 7 times, because you don't want to go back again. I cannot tell you how many tribes in Native institutions and organizations that we know in Hawaii as well, where we said, look, this is expensive stuff. Are you sure? And they said, yeah. We're going to do it this way. We're going to do it this way. We need it right now. So we're going to buy the point-to-point microwave. And then a year later, the fiber money comes and the expenditure's already been made, and they're limited to the next 10 years for unlimited capacity. So that having been said, there's a reason why there's an illustration there of that fiber going aerial. There's a reason why there are different solutions, and solutions that in the final design, as this grows years into the future, will be ready for the future too. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Zachary. I'm going to recognize Deputy.
Hello again, everyone. I think there might be a distinction worth making really quickly before we move on. I'm hearing and recognizing the concerns coming from at least 3 commissioners now about 5G. So it might be helpful to distinguish between 5G and the 2.5 gigahertz licenses, just so that there's an understanding of that difference, right? 5G stands for the 5th generation of LTE. Jeff and Irene, you folks can nod if I'm remembering all of this correctly, but that sort of operates in like the 3.5 gigahertz range all the way up to like the 10 gigahertz range. The licenses that we're talking about and building our network in fall in the 2.5 gigahertz range, which is like your router in your house. Your microwave, I think, in some instances hits in the 2.5 range. So that's sort of the scale at which wireless occurs. So when we talk about towers, I want to be super clear that towers are not always synonymous with putting a 5G broadcaster on it. You can have a tower with a 2.5 gigahertz wireless solution broadcaster on it as well. So I hope that sort of carves out, that letter G pops up so many times, it can be confusing. So I want to be clear that the G in 5G is not the same as 2.5 gigahertz, which is what we're working with. And I'm seeing a slight nod from Irene. So I think I've learned a decent amount in the last 6 months from her.
For those who do not know, both Niniao and Tyler earned a certificate from the Internet Society on network design. when the Internet Society came out, and at the University of Hawaii Hilo held a week-long training. So you are too bashful, Deputy. You definitely understand. At any level, there can be harmful emissions. I think everybody has heard the potential of certain of our foreign diplomats being irradiated and people getting sick. There's a truth there. There's a truth that has to be accepted. There are other levels at which, the lower levels at which the service can work, and it's absolutely not harmful at all. It's less harmful than being out in the sunlight, which is also electromagnetic spectrum and can give you a sunburn. My point to the three commissioners and the entire commission that have raised this is that we will be absolutely vigilant and transparent about whatever spectrum is utilized. First, that it's deployed responsibly and is put in the right place. Second, that the emissions levels are compliant and correct, are calibrated properly. And these come, but yes, 2.5 gigahertz is not the same spectrum that usually is used for fifth generation. And the idea is not necessarily to deploy fifth generation with the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum. What's very interesting is the flexibility that 2.5 gigahertz is coming out with in these licenses. It really, well, to borrow the analogy that you used before, it really does allow you to decide what kind of seats you want to put in that bus, and seatbelts and other equipment, and how big you want those windows in that bus to be so that people can utilize that internet to their need. So thank you.
Well, and the good thing, the good thing is that 2.5 gigahertz has been around for a long time.
Oh yeah.
And so there's been a real evolution in the technology. So the technology that was used, a decade ago for 2.5 is very different than what's available today.
So maybe to reassure the commission as well, a few years ago, about 10 years ago, we worked with a tribe in Northern California, and a new, unlike 2.5 gigahertz, we granted an experimental license for a manufacturer of radios to do a demonstration project. It was a limited 2-year experimental license for them to be able to send a signal down a reservation that was 40 miles long and 2 miles wide. If you know reservations in Northern California, you know exactly who I'm talking about. But this company we made them jump through so many hoops to prove and to demonstrate, and on a quarterly basis, show their engineering files, because that was that was in a different area of spectrum, and it was a new device. In 2.5 gigahertz, there's a lot of stuff that's already been developed by manufacturers like Motorola that are easily calibrated and compliant and made to be compliant. So hopefully that helps fill out more of the understanding around 5G and the differences and as you say, Deputy, the specifics of 5G. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jeff and Irene. Next is Dennis, followed by Randy.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, listening to the conversation today, I think I'm just happy that we have a professional organization that's going to help us, steer through this process. Our last, what we thought was a professional organization, didn't work out well, but I'm all for moving this forward. I think ACI, just based on their personal resumes, basically helps us, see inside the system, understand the system. Now it's up to us to make sure that our beneficiaries understand how the system's going to work and how we're going to protect them as well as we move forward. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Randy?
Thank you, William. So, I failed to mention that I was also afforded an opportunity to have a follow-up discussion with Jeff and Irene as a result of my concerns. So I want to also acknowledge everyone for the opportunity provided there. Jeff, I do appreciate your follow-up with your friends to have a discussion that reaffirms everybody's commitment to acting in ways that address the health concerns of our beneficiaries. I think in being afforded this opportunity not only to drive the bus, but to determine what kind of seats, et cetera, are going into the bus. These conversations are really important because we need this kind of information to act responsibly in deciding what this model is going to look like. And this is not stuff that we do every day, and yet we carry the kuleana to make the right choices. So the more we talk, the more knowledgeable we become, the better able we are to make the right decision. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Mahalo, Randy. Are there any further questions? Commission members? Okay, not seeing any other hands. I want to thank Jeff and Irene, Niniao, and Deputy for the presentation. And then I would like to take a 10-minute recess and then come back for the next workshop on the investment policies. Okay, thank you
Hello,
all.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, 10-minute recess. members, if I could remind you to please turn your cameras on. We have 3 with their cameras, actually 4 now with the cameras off. We need 5. Four. Randy or Daniel? I mean, Randy or David? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think we have everybody. We have 5 out of 7. We're gonna start since we have 5. Okay, we'll get started since we have 5 out of 7 with their cameras on. Just gonna ask real quickly, commissioners that are on the screen right now, do you have anyone in the room with you at this point, just as a follow-up with Act 220? Is there anyone that has, anyone else in the room with them?
No.
Okay, seeing none, we will proceed. Next order of business is the appointment of the Investment Committee Permitted Interaction Group, and we turn to Joby.
Aloha, Commissioners. So on behalf of the chair, we had this item listed in the announcements, but because it was a little unusual and based on Ryan's advice and an abundance of caution, we thought it'd be better just to agendize it again. So it is informing the commission of the establishment of an investment committee permitted interaction group. We want to thank the commissioners that wanted to participate. Unfortunately, we had more commissioners that wanted to participate than we could seat on the committee. So in consultation with the chair, the members of the committee are David Ka'apu, Russell Ka'upu, Pauline Namu'o, and the chair. The committee's intent and purpose is to research and recommend to the commission a course of action to effectively implement the investment policy adopted by the commission in August of 2018. That was included in the item. And, you know, our first meeting is scheduled for September 2nd at 3 p.m. And we will be keeping the commission abreast of the work of the committee. Our hope is to have the work completed by the end of the calendar year with any kind of recommendations or actions that may be needed, or the findings and recommendations we are targeting for January 2022 to come before the commission, if not sooner.
Are there any questions? Commissioners? Okay, no questions. Thank you very, very much. That concludes the business for today. The motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
By Randy. Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, seeing none, motion is carried. I want to thank you for your time this morning. and the good questions about broadband and impacts as we go forward. Everybody have a good day and be safe.
You too.
Aloha.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Aloha.
Hello, everybody.
Mahalo.